Hello, my Bill 5000 Nation. How is everyone doing tonight? We are back. That's right. We up in here. Trying a few things different. It's been a long day. Got kind of switched up a little bit. You know how it goes. Alright. Tonight we are starting off with, I do believe, top 5, and it is titled 5 Disturbing Real Life Horror Stories That Will Keep You Up Tonight. So, don't plan on going to sleep. Alright, let's get my big old booty over here in the corner where I belong. Get over there. Alright. Now, I'm all set. I'm comfy. I got my drink. I got my smoke. I'm ready to get started. So, turn your lights down low. Put on something comfy. Cuddle up with something special. Let's get spooky.
If you've clicked on this video, chances are you love a good horror story. Lots of us love to watch creepy movies and read Stephen King books,
Oh, yes.
But it's all just fiction.
Like, I don't know about the rest of y'all. I know there's 1,000,001 Halloween enthusiasts in the world. But in this house, it's a whole nother level. Like, no lie. We have Scary Movie Month all month long. Any movie we watch has to be a scary movie of some sort. TV shows, same way. It's got to be a horror-themed TV show. And honestly, it's like the one month a year that everybody really kind of congregates into the front room. It's amazing. I mean, I'm excited that, Halloween's actually right around the corner. It feels weird that it is. Like, I don't know. It's like this year's gone by way too fast.
Made up tale to get our hearts racing and make us check under the bed before we go to sleep. But what if some of these stories aren't just made up in a writer's imagination? Well, these 5 are certainly not made up. Here are 5 disturbing, real-life horror stories. Now, before we begin, chances are if you love the content produced here, you've gone on your own researching endeavours to discover more mysteries of our world. But you've probably wondered how safe your internet investigations are, or questioned how to watch new TV shows.
Let's go ahead and go past the VPN stuff.
In the northeast of England.
Alright, there we go.
Stephen Shaw. In July 2011, Vicky Harrison decided to throw a small party at her home in Gateshead, in the northeast of England. She invited a few old friends, Michael Glover, Stephen Shaw, and his sister Anne Richardson. Vicky's ex-partner's daughter, Robin Little, was also there, and she arrived with her boyfriend, Dale Walker. The party was in full swing, and the group were drinking beer and spirits. Some were also using recreational drugs. Robin noticed that a man sitting in the corner was acting strangely. She asked Vicky for his name and was told that he was Stephen Shaw. Later, Shaw became very aggressive and caused an argument. His sister Anne decided to leave, and although Shaw wanted to stay, he was persuaded to make sure that his sister got home safely. But he kept returning to the house. On the first occasion, he went back to retrieve some money that his sister had left. On the second, he used an excuse of retrieving some alcohol. At about 1:30 a.m, Robin and Dale, who were both 19, asked Vicky if they could stay over and went to bed in the spare room. Dale was able to get to sleep straight away, but Robin laid awake for some time. She couldn't get past that feeling that there was someone else in the room with them. She woke Dale up to tell him, and he got up and turned on the light. Suddenly, Shaw rolled out from underneath the bed. He had been lying in wait there with a kitchen knife taped to each of his gloved hands. He also had a tea towel wrapped around the lower part of his face in an unsuccessful attempt to hide his identity.
What?
Shaw sprung up and lashed out at Dale, stabbing him in the neck and side. He also sliced through Dale's hand, almost severing his fingers. Dale shouted at his girlfriend to jump out of the window, but she ran towards her boyfriend to try and help him, and was stabbed in the shoulder. On hearing the commotion, Vicky ran upstairs to see what was happening. Shaw stabbed her so hard in the chest that 2 of her rib bones were broken. As a result of her injuries, she suffered a heart attack and a collapsed lung. She was lucky to survive, as the knife had severed an artery. She was only saved because of major emergency surgery. Shaw had previously been jailed for squirting ammonia in the face of a woman during a burglary. And in March 2012, he was found guilty of 3 attempted murders and jailed for an indefinite period for the protection of the public. Throughout the trial, Shaw protested his innocence. Austin.
What? How are you going to be like, I'm innocent? I don't know how them knives got taped to my gloves. I mean, I didn't mean to stab them. I was just trying to get my high fives and hugs and cause the knives. I mean, what? No.
Harroof. Harroof was born in Jupiter, Florida on the 21st of December 1996. He lived with his mother, Mina, and graduated from Suncoast Community High School in Riviera Beach in 2015. He was a wrestling star and also played defensive tackle on the football team. He was well liked by his teammates and was known as being a good kid, although he had to be prompted to be more aggressive when on the defensive line. His father, Dr. Wade Harroof, owns a cosmetic dentist surgery in Palm Beach and has appeared on TV and radio shows. Harroof later became a student at Florida State University, and on the night of August the 15th, 2016, 19-year-old Harroof ate out at a restaurant with his family, where he began to behave bizarrely. At one point, he went home and began drinking cooking oil. He later returned to the restaurant, but left abruptly in an agitated state. He walked to the house of John Joseph Stevens III, who was 59, and his 53-year-old wife, Michelle Mishcon. They were in the garage at the time, and Harroof began to randomly attack the couple, stabbing and hitting them with any implements that he could find. A neighbor named Jeffrey Fisher heard Michelle screaming and tried to intervene, but he was also stabbed several times. When police officers arrived at the scene, Harroof was found on the driveway in his underwear. He was on top of John Stevens' body, making strange animal noises and eating his face and chest. Harroof even continued to bite Mr. Stevens despite being tasered. He begged the officers to shoot him, claiming I deserved to die. He did eventually let go when he was bitten by a police dog and officers were able to handcuff him. John and Michelle were declared dead at the scene. Mr. Fisher was taken to hospital and survived the attack. Harroof was also taken to hospital because he had drunk some sort of caustic liquid taken from the couple's garage. Police officers thought that Harroof had taken the drug Flakka before the incident occurred. The designer drug Flakka can cause severe aggression, extreme hallucinations, and superhuman strength. Doses of the drug can be bought for just $5. In 2015, a man in Australia was arrested when high on the drug. He was trying to have sex with a tree and believed that he was the god Thor. But a toxicology report showed no synthetic drug.
Oh, God. It's not funny. Dude was trying to have, let's say, relations, yeah, with a tree. With a tree. I mean, this is going to be like the one time where, normally people are like, yeah, I'll have what he's having, or yeah, I'll have what she's having. I'll just go ahead and say no to all of the above. No.
Drugs in Haruf's system, although there was a trace amount of cannabis. Haruf was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder.
Did you say there was no drugs in the system?
The report showed no synthetic drugs in Haruf's system, although there was a trace amount of cannabis. Haruf was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder and burglary. During the psychiatric evaluation, Haruf said he had been having bad thoughts during the days leading up to the murders. He said that he had feelings of paranoia and believed that gods and demons were talking to him. His mother also said he had been acting strangely and claimed to have superpowers. Austin Haruf is still waiting trial, as his sanity at the time of the murders is being brought into question. The Strack family. In 1984, Ron Lafferty and his younger brother, Dan, brutally murdered their sister-in-law Brenda and her 18-month-old daughter Erika by slashing their throats. We mentioned this case in a previous video. Ron believed that he was the prophet Elijah and that God had told him to remove the victims, although it was Dan who carried out the slayings. Ron believed that Brenda was standing in the way of his youngest brother Alan becoming part of his fanatical religious group. Sadly, many years after their heinous crimes, Dan Lafferty's twisted beliefs led to another tragedy. Fast forward to 2014, where Benjamin and Christy Strack lived in a duplex apartment in Springfield, Utah, with their children Benson, 14, Emery, 12, and Zion, 11. Christy had a dream about Dan Lafferty and became obsessed with him. Eventually, Lafferty, Benjamin, and Christy would become close friends, and the couple would visit Dan every week at the Utah State Prison. Dan even claims that he and Christy were in love, and that although Benjamin knew, he didn't mind. 19-year-old Jansen was the eldest sibling of the Strack family. At about 8 p.m. on September 27, 2004, 19-year-old Jansen walked into the Strack's apartment with his grandmother. There was no need to knock, the front door was standing wide open. Jansen had been trying to contact his parents by text message, email and phone call, but there had been no reply. He decided to go around with his grandmother to see if there was a problem. Horrified, Jansen found all 5 members of his family dead in the master bedroom. They were found with empty bottles of liquid methadone and cold and flu medication nearby. On searching the house, a notebook was found belonging to a 14-year-old Benson. A letter inside it was written to his best friend, bequeathing all his possessions. Sadly, it was obvious that he was aware that something was going to happen and that he would be found dead before long. Benjamin, 37, and Christy, 36, had isolated themselves in the weeks prior to the incident. They ceased all contact with friends and family members. Ben even stopped going to work. When they were in contact with their family, the couple talked about wanting to escape the growing evil of the world. It was assumed they wanted to move away to somewhere more rural and live off-grid. Police determined that Benjamin and Christy murdered their 2 young children before committing suicide. It is not known whether Benson was forced to take the cocktail of lethal drugs or did so himself once he realized that the rest of his family were dead. Dan Lafferty believes that it was his philosophy of hell on earth that led to the Strack's murder-suicides. He said, "My insanity messes with people's lives. I'll miss them, but I'm happy for them. I believe they are in paradise now." Both Benjamin and Christy had been given a court ordering drug treatment, although children's services were not involved with the family. Christy had been taking methadone for a heroin addiction at the time of the deaths. Both Benjamin and Christy were known to suffer from long-term mental illness and drug addictions.
Whoa.
Angel Hayes. Angel Hayes loved to ride his motorcycle as fast as he could. He would tear around the roads of his French village. His mother worried about Angel riding around at such high speeds and without a helmet, and she would often lecture him about the dangers. but Angel was determined to have his freedom. Then on the morning of Wednesday the 1st of September 1937, Hayes had a horrific motorcycle crash at the age of just 18. He lost control of the motorcycle and was thrown headfirst into a brick wall. He was pronounced dead at the scene. His injuries to his face were so horrific that his parents were not allowed to see his body. His funeral was held 3 days later, and he was interred at the village cemetery. Just days before the accident, Angel's parents had taken out a large life insurance policy for Angel, and a couple of days after the funeral, they filed the claim. This sent alarm bells ringing at the insurance company, who were sure that there was something fraudulent going on. The insurance investigators got in contact with the local medical examiner's office to find out if anything unusual had been found during Angel's autopsy. They were told that Angel's parents had actually refused permission for a post-mortem and chose to have their son buried quickly in a closed casket. The investigators insisted that Angel's body had to be exhumed and re-examined to rule out the possibility of foul play. The coffin was unearthed and returned to the office of the medical examiner. They were shocked to find that Angel's body was warm to the touch. He had a weak pulse and his breathing was shallow, but he was definitely alive. It was agreed that his skull had been fractured during the accident, and this had put his body into a deep coma. This had slowed down Angel's need for oxygen, allowing him to stay alive in the coffin for 3 days. Without the doubts of a suspicious insurance investigator, Angel would have eventually died in the coffin, perhaps even woken up.
What? That's crazy, bro. So he wasn't even dead. He was playing possum. He was buried for 3 days, and thanks to the coma, like he whoa, bro.
Before he did so, it seems that the taking out of the insurance policy just before Angel's death was a complete coincidence. Angel went on to become a local celebrity. He was an eccentric, known as a poet and an inventor. People would travel from all over France to ask him about his experience, and he even appeared on French TV shows. In the 1950s, Angel invented an electric security coffin that would prevent other people from being buried prematurely. The coffin had its own oxygen supply, a food cabinet, and a chemical toilet. There was also a stock of books and a radio to prevent boredom while the unlucky person awaited rescue. In 2008, Angel Hayes died at his home in France, aged 90.
Wow. That's crazy, bro.
Agnes Wildman. Accrington is a town in the north of England. In 1923, Maud Wildman lived in the small market town with her 5-year-old daughter Agnes. Maud's husband had been killed in an accident at a munitions factory during the First World War, leaving her devastated. Although she missed her husband and was saddened by his passing, Maud did not want to bring up her daughter without a father, so she began seeing a local man named John Wiley. Maud and John were married, and they moved into a lodging house at number 12 Victoria Street, which they shared with their 65-year-old landlady, Miss Hornbury. Sadly, it turned out that John was an alcoholic. He would spend a lot of time in the nearby, popular, working men's club before staggering home, where he would be both verbally and physically abusive to Maud. Some days she would arrive at the cotton mill where she worked, with a black eye. Other times she could hardly stand because he had beaten her so badly. Miss Hornbury was very upset by this and told Maud that she would be happy to throw John out if it would help. Maud agreed, and when he returned home that morning, John found his suitcase packed and waiting for him. Before he left, he pointed at Agnes and threatened Maud menacingly, saying, "I'll get back at you through her." Accrington police were informed of the threat, and they kept John under investigation for the next few days. John continued to drink a good deal, but he never tried to make contact with Maud or Agnes, so the surveillance was called off. It was then that John went to Agnes's school. He saw her in the playground and grabbed her hand, telling her that they were going home to see her mother at Victoria Street. The headmistress, Miss Westwell, rushed over to find out what was happening, but John tricked her with a forged letter. The letter said that the family were going to Rishton on the train, so Agnes was needed at home. Unfortunately, Mr. Westwell allowed John to leave with Agnes. On arrival at Victoria Street, John let himself into the house. Miss Hornbury was startled to see him standing there with Agnes in her front room. She screamed at him to leave, but John began to repeatedly hit the elderly lady, knocking out her teeth. He then picked up the coal shovel and continued to attack her with it. Hearing the commotion, the next-door neighbours sent for the police. Constables Flegg and Maudsley arrived shortly after. They walked into the house and found Agnes kneeling beneath the dining table. She was rocking backwards and forwards. Agnes was surrounded by a large pool of what the policemen thought was water, and there were two small white lumps sitting in the middle of the pool. It was then that they realised, to their horror, that the pool was blood and the white lumps were her hands. Agnes continued to rock with her stumps pressed hard against the floor. Miss Hornbury had wounds to the back of her head, a broken nose and other injuries about her legs and torso. Despite this, she had managed to crawl to the back door of the house, where she was found by her neighbour, Mrs. Parker. Sadly, Mrs. Parker was so distressed upon finding her friend in such a state that she suffered a heart attack, collapsed and died. The policeman found John in the kitchen. He had attempted to slash his own throat and was breathing gas through a tube that he had attached to the boiler. He was unconscious but alive. The gash was neither long nor deep, and he had avoided cutting through the windpipe or any arteries. Agnes, Miss Hornbury and John all survived. Brave little Agnes was in the hospital for months after, but she was able to give evidence in court, where she appeared with her stumps still wrapped in bandage. John was charged with feloniously wounding Sarah Ann Hornbury by means of a coal shovel with intent to murder, and unlawfully and unwillingly causing grievous bodily harm with intent to maim to his stepdaughter Agnes Wildman, aged 5 years, by severing both her hands with a razor. On Saturday the 8th of December 1923, John pleaded guilty to both charges at Manchester Assizes. Judge Branson was emotional when he said, "The story of your offence is the most horrible to which I have ever listened. Cold, calculated, fiendish attempt to be avenged on your wife through this unfortunate little girl. No punishment is adequate. There is a maximum I can give, and I will. You will do penal servitude for life." Agnes was awarded £5,000 from the Mayor's Fund to help with their recovery. She later married and lived in Accrington all of her life, where she was known as the Lady with No Hands. So that's it for this.
Oh my god. Bro, no. Everything he did, I would have done to him. And then I would put him under the jail. There would be no hole deep enough for his body. No. Okay, let's do...
If horror is your favorite genre, then the...
Yeah, that's right. Let's do some chills. This is top 10 scary videos that are straight up bussin'. Bussin', bruh. Bust.
If horror is your favorite genre, then these top 10 scary videos are straight up bussin'. Number 10, caught on Zoom. Zoom has served this past year well from remote...
You should never say bussin' ever again. I'm sorry.
meetings to virtual classes. The video conferencing app has allowed its users to stay productive during a lost year. In this case, it even saved a student in Ecuador who faced intruders while on a Zoom call. Published in September of 2020, 4 men broke into a female student's home during a live Zoom class, only to end up in cuffs shortly after. The terrifying incident was entirely caught on camera. The woman is seen in the video turning around to witness the strangers in her home. She jumps out of her chair and is backed into a corner. Having not noticed, the professor continues speaking, but fellow students call his attention to what's happening. They attempt to keep the girl and another family member in the home quiet, but then realize their crime is being witnessed in real time. This is when the laptop screen is turned down and freezes. The professor and the students quickly jump into action, calling the police. In the meantime, the intruders manage to make off with $4,000 in cash, among other possessions. However, the thieves were thwarted by technology a second time, when police tracked them down using the location on the cell phones they took. Well, Zoom wasn't designed as a security app. This is one instance where it serves such a purpose, and there are bound to be many more. Number 9.
That is crazy. They're lucky. Oh God, they're lucky. That's crazy.
Mysterious
though.
shadow. This event, captured by a CCTV camera, shows the last known footage of a flight attendant, published to YouTube in January of 2021. Christine was spending New Year's Eve with her friends and co-workers at City Garden Grand Hotel in the Philippines. Throughout the night, she appears to be enjoying herself with several friends in the CCTV footage, but was found the next day in a bathtub and had passed away. Those in the video have since been cleared, but police suspect foul play. In their initial investigation, they believed others were involved in Christine's passing. Unfortunately, Makati's prosecutor's office dismissed the case in April of 2021, quoting lack of evidence, though 11 persons of interest had been under investigation. The last known footage of Christine shows her being carried through the hotel. That's when an eerie shadow falls in the hallway across the floor, in a spot close to a door that she had been seen entering several times throughout the night. What or who is casting this shadow? It might very well hold the answer to if foul play was involved. After all, the proof is in the details. Number 8. Leaked footage. This is Pentagon-confirmed US Navy footage from 2019. In the footage, unidentified flying objects shaped like spheres are seen plunging into the water off the coast of San Diego. Published by Jeremy Corbell in May of 2021, the CIC, or Combat Information Center, of the USS Omaha caught the unidentified flying objects on July 15th. The dark object can be seen flying across the sky near the ship with a sudden about face towards the water, known as a UAP, or Unidentified Aerial Phenomena event. The climatic moment occurs when one of the UFOs dives straight into the ocean. Even more mysteriously, neither the aircraft nor any wreckage was discovered. The long cylindrical object was reported by American Airlines pilots as well, which saw it fly over their plane. Such sightings aren't out of the ordinary, as pilots have been reporting similar aerial phenomena for decades. Former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Chris Mellon, confirmed the continuity of these events and said we haven't been paying enough attention to these recurring UAP. Today.com quotes Mellon as saying, "What we are seeing are a number of distinct different things. Sometimes we're seeing a 50-foot object that can travel at hypersonic speeds and seemingly go into orbit or come down from altitudes above potentially 100,000 feet. Documentary filmmaker Jeremy Corbell agrees with this, stating that whether this UFO is worldly or otherworldly, it's just part of a much larger series of events. But will us common folk ever know the details of this larger series of events? A government task force has been reviewing this footage and will report its findings to Congress, but I'm doubtful that we'll ever see that report." Number 7. Light and sound. If you hear this sound, run for cover. Rays of light shine upward in this video, published to Paranormal World in December of 2020. But that's not the only oddity in this clip. Turn the sound on full volume and you'll be blasted into the midst of a prehistoric jungle. The light then turns into what looks to be a winged figure, and the sound becomes more symphonic. The creature forms a sphere before its wings reappear, perhaps preparing for takeoff. The man filming takes this as his cue to leave. But judging with a creature like this, he can run but he can't hide. Number 6.
What the heck is that? That's freaking creepy. Like some kind of weird demonic winged beast.
Secret room. Discovering a hidden room in your home always begs the question, what was it used for? Posted to TikTok by Abby Maya 14. This TikToker found an entire hidden basement in her storage cupboard. Well, it's not unusual for a home to have some sort of crawl space beneath it. This one is particularly creepy because it looks lived in. After tearing up the floor, the homeowner discovered wooden steps leading down to a full-on basement. Not only can you stand fully upright in this hidden subterranean room, it appears as though someone once called this space home. A poster is plastered to the wall and it looks as though it's been clawed to pieces. There are benches in one corner and what appears to be a hearth. So again, this begs the question, what was this room used for? Some in the comments of the video have
maybe a fallout shelter. A lot of places like that have them. They do. I mean, the world has gone through traumatic times. A lot of places have them. It's probably just a fallout shelter that eventually just got boarded up.
Speculated that this might be an air raid shelter. Others say perhaps someone was squatting down there. It's probably best to climb up out of there, cover it over with a rug, and throw away the key. Number 5. Playtime. There's nothing wrong with an imaginary friend, but when these friends turn evil, playtime is over. Published by Breakman in March of 2021. This video has been making the rounds in the Spanish-speaking YouTube community for good reason. The video shows a girl playing alone, or at least she first appears to be. With her doll lying beside her, the girl is reading a book. Whoever she's reading with keeps turning the page. The invisible hand seems not to bother the girl initially, as she just flips the page back and keeps on reading, but then she clearly gets frustrated with her imaginary friend's impatience and cries out about it. There also appears at times to be something peeking around the corner behind her, something with a white face. Is this imaginary friend actually a ghost that resides in the home, or is it something far more sinister? Number 4. Nuclear bunker. Exploring an abandoned secret nuclear bunker designed for NATO headquarters? What could go wrong? That's what the crew from YouTube channel Broken Window Theory did in November of 2020. The team explains a bit about the video, writing, "In the belly of a mountain, we found this secret NATO bunker at an undisclosed location, hard to find and even harder to enter. Naturally, the team considers it the ideal place to get trapped, as they dive right into the belly of the beast. The bunker is located in southern Italy. They arrive at the entrance, an unobtrusive cement block which they pull up to reveal the tunnel that they climb down into. The secret bunker was dug right into the side of the mountain and stretches several kilometers. As they walk deeper and deeper into the mountain, it gets colder by the minute. 200 or 300 people were stationed here in the darkness when it was active. Now, only moldy furniture and rusted pipes remain. They arrive at the fallout door, which looks creepy and foreboding in and of itself. Later, they come across a control room, as well as lists of aircraft and maps still pinned to the walls. When they come to the water reservoir, they toss a few rocks in to test the echo, which seems never ending. The echo sounds even more ominous a few moments later, almost like someone singing. After exploring a bit further, they finally climb out of the bunker and back into the 21st century. Although this bunker is a pretty epic urban exploration, It's lucky it was never made necessary, otherwise the 21st century may not
That's
exist.
cool, but
Number
creepy
3,
all at the
haunted
same
house for
time.
sale. Warning, do not buy a haunted house off the dark web at 3 a.m. At least, that's what YouTuber Gesture warns, as he and his crew did just that and lived to regret it. Published to YouTube in April of 2021, before they bought the house, they visited it. When they arrived in the middle of the night, the door was already wide open. A sign taped to the door read, "We will be back shortly, feel free to look around." Gesture says they felt a connection to this house, discovered it was for sale, and bought it to renovate it. And during these renovations, this happened.
Whoa.
Zoom in on the window. What is that? Is there a figure standing outside looking in, or inside being reflected? And if so, why can't we see the figure inside the house? This isn't the only creepy occurrence that happened during the renovation. During a tour of the space, the crew enters a dimly lit back room. In a dark corner, something is shuffling. You can see just a tiny flicker of white rocking back and forth in the corner before the figure starts shuffling faster towards them, prompting the crew to dive out of the room. While the renovation looks great and all, how can they live in the haunted house after this? They should probably listen to YouTuber Hype Mike in the comments, who writes, "We need to lock that door forever," and I couldn't agree more. Number 2, sounds from the woods. While most of the scary clips from the woods could potentially be wild animals, this one's a head scratcher. Published to YouTube by Ian Black in September of 2020. This isn't the shriek of a mountain lion or some other wild cat. This is next level terrifying. The roar echoes through the calm woods as though you're at the bottom of a well. While at first it may sound puzzling, the mystery is solved when the cameraman tells his dog, "We've missed the train."
We missed the train, Mo. We missed it.
But without such context, what would you feel if you were blasted with this off-putting roar during your nature walk? I guess lesson learned, stay away from the tracks. I've got a challenge for you.
Really, Chills?
Since you've made it this far.
You're slipping, bro. You're reaching. You're reaching.
In November of 2020, the day after Halloween, sooner, paranormal investigators visited a family-owned restaurant in Oklahoma to capture ghostly activity, and they weren't disappointed. The team placed cameras throughout the Route 66 restaurant overnight. When they checked them the next day, they found a ghostly reign of horror had occurred in their absence. The lights in the restaurant went berserk, flickering on and off. Moreover, several orbs were seen in the footage of the back room, with a strange growl heard after one particular orb floated in front of the camera. They also captured voices saying things like, "We're dead and I told you not to whisper." The names Ethel and Duke were also mentioned in the EVPs. Are Ethel and Duke still dining at this restaurant? Maybe they're just trying to get someone's attention to take their order. If you need to sleep tonight,
He's reaching anymore, y'all. I don't. Chills is sleeping. Chills is slipping. He's slipping. No, that was a spider web. It wasn't orbs. The lights flickering was someone flicking the lights. Don't. Just because I was born in the morning time does not mean I was born this morning.
What do you want? Please leave me alone.
Alright, as y'all can tell, this is some life of luxury. This one is titled, "He's Been Living Inside Her Mattress." Okay.
The hospital is literally right next to her.
Taylor, so nice to meet you, Parker.
Nice to meet you. I think they're coming to my house at night.
Do you see that? That door's opening. Bro, he just destroyed our camera!
Hello, Lux Army. Let's smash 100,000 likes to show how strong we are. So for this episode, we received an email from an 18-year-old girl named Taylor. Taylor's parents have been out of town on vacation for the past 2 months, and during this time, Taylor believes that someone has been living in her house with her. She says that she's been hearing footsteps around her house and animal-like screeching at night. Also, Taylor mentioned that her house is right next to an abandoned mental hospital. She showed us this video for proof.
What do you want? Please leave me alone!
So today, we're gonna drive out to Taylor's house to try to figure out if there actually is someone living in there with her. But first, a quick word from our sponsor.
I'm trying to listen to my music, but these homemade headphones suck! I wish I could afford new ones!
Oh, God.
So what do you think the chances are that someone's in the house with her?
Well, I think like usual, we should give her the benefit of the doubt.
But dude, she didn't send us any proof. All she said was she was hearing noises.
So what are you saying? Do you think she's imagining this?
I don't know. Do you think someone from the mental asylum's living in her house?
Dude, all I know is we gotta make sure that there's no one in there with her trying to cause her harm.
All right. Yo, dude, we're here.
Wait, this is it?
Yeah. Bro, she wasn't lying. The mental hospital is literally right next to her.
Okay, just calm down. Let's go in and talk to her, okay?
Okay, let's go.
Let's go. Alright, bro, let's go knock.
Okay.
Hi. Taylor, so nice to meet you. Parker.
Nice to meet you.
Hi. Can we come in so we can sit down and talk, please?
Okay.
Okay, let's go in. Thanks.
Oh my God.
House.
She didn't tell them they had to be quiet. It's a first. It's a first.
So Taylor, thank you for letting us sit down with you.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about what's bothering you?
There's someone who I think is stalking me. I think they're coming to my house at night.
So you really think that this guy lives in here with you?
I know what I saw.
So exactly what did you see?
Alright, so 2 nights ago, I was like downstairs to get a glass of water, and I felt like someone was standing behind me. But when I turned around, nothing was there, and my bedroom door was open.
So did you see anyone in your bedroom?
No, but I really feel like there was something in there with me.
Have you had any other experiences like this?
Well, the other night, when I was trying to sleep, I felt something touching me, and I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or not.
Are you sure that a lot of this can't just be from your imagination?
Well, I thought I was crazy until I started getting these pictures.
Look at this.
What?
He was in my house.
Okay, thank you for showing that to me.
Are you sure it's not just like a joke by your friend or boyfriend?
Listen, I know there's someone in my house, I just don't know where.
Okay, Taylor, so tonight we're going to be putting cameras all over your house, trying to figure out if there actually is someone in here. We're going to be watching the cameras live on our phone in the car. I don't want you to worry about anything now. I just want you to go to sleep like normal tonight and let us get to work, okay?
Okay.
Alright, let's get to work.
Okay, let's go.
Alright guys, so let's just have some cameras in this house.
This place is really big, bro.
Alright, yo, let's just put a camera downstairs here. It's downstairs camera.
What the hell? Parker, you need to come look at this.
No, come on, dude. We gotta put the cameras upstairs. Come on.
Dude. Okay.
Let's put the camera in the guest room right here. That's good. Let's go. Alright, let's just put a camera in Taylor's room.
There's weird things going on behind me. It's very disconcerting.
Really quickly.
Just saying.
Hi, Taylor. Can we just put a camera in your room really quickly?
Okay.
Okay, let's go. That's good. Alright, so we're just gonna go away in the car now. Everything's alright. Just go to sleep like normally, okay?
Okay.
Okay, let's go.
Dude, what's up with her?
I don't know.
We head out to the car.
Okay, so we just got back to the car. We set up all of the cameras. We have one downstairs, one in the hallway, one in the spare bedroom, and one in Taylor's room.
Dude, I just can't believe how big and creepy your house is. Do you think we have enough cameras in there?
Yeah, I hope so. Let's just relax now and watch, okay?
Okay.
It's awfully quiet right now. That's quite unusual for life of luxury. Just saying, normally there's something moving by now.
Wait, go back to that camera.
What?
Do you see that? That door's opening. Bro, what the hell is that?
I don't know, dude. I think Taylor was right.
What's wrong with that guy's face?
Bro, can you please stop yelling? Calm down. Okay, so we know there's a guy in the house.
What the heck is that? There's something wrong with that. Like that's weird, unusual, strange. I don't like no.
Okay? We just gotta figure out what this guy wants.
Oh god, I'm disgusted looking at him.
Hold on one moment, y'all. I'll be right back. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. We're back. Let's get back to it.
Look, he's leaving the room. Where's he going?
I don't know, dude. Let's just watch him. If he goes anywhere near her, we're going inside, okay?
Oh god, okay. Dude, why is he making that noise? And why is he taller than the doorway?
I don't know. Is Taylor still sleeping? Let me check. Where did this guy go?
Dude, look, I found him. He's downstairs.
Wait, does he see our camera?
Bro, he just destroyed our camera!
Okay, again, just calm down, dude. Let's just try to find out where he is. No.
Dude, so 3 of our 4 cameras aren't working. How is that even possible?
Well, we only saw him destroy one, so maybe there's a problem with the connection or something?
Hold on, let me try to fix it. Dude, I can't figure out why these cameras aren't working.
Try closing the app.
I think I know what's wrong. Wait, it's loading.
How is she not waking up?
Yo, dude, do you hear that? I think Taylor's screaming.
Wait, what?
Yo, we gotta go inside. Come on. Let's go.
How did she not feel around the mattress?
Dude, what was that thing?
I don't know. Oh, we're in the stairs.
Hurry, we're on the stairs.
Okay, let's go.
Which way?
All right, listen, don't worry. We're gonna get you someplace safe tonight. You can stay with us, okay?
We drove Taylor back and tried to contact her parents. We were never able to get a response from them. Oh no.
Thank you guys for watching this video. Let's try to smash 100,000 likes for the next episode.
Parents? Alright. I like that. That was pretty. How did. She had to know that he was in the mattress. I mean, come on now. Alright, now, as per usual, we're going to end it with a little bit of MrBallen. Why? Because he is an amazing storyteller, and he does a really good job, and I like to end it off on a high note, because he never fails. Let's just put it like that.
Today's story includes several very
This is called The Nudist Terrified a Country. This nudist terrified a country. Mature audiences only.
distressing and at times graphic segments. And also at the end of the story, we show several pictures that on the surface may seem fairly benign, but once you understand their context, they are quite disturbing and haunting. So
okay.
On February 12th, 1999, 42 Carol Sund, along with her 15-year-old daughter Julie and Julie's longtime friend Silvina Peloso, who was 16 years old, boarded a plane in Eureka, California. After a quick 1-hour-long flight, they landed in San Francisco and then got their bags from baggage claim and then walked over to the airport's car rental center. After Carol signed some rental agreement paperwork with the person at the front desk, they were given car keys, and then the three women walked out of the airport into the parking lot where they saw their car. It was a 1999 red Pontiac Grand Prix sedan. After the women had put their luggage in the trunk, they all climbed inside, and then Carol began driving east towards the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. Julie was competing in a cheerleading competition the following day at that university, and Julie was considering going to this school after she graduated high school, and so this cheerleading competition was a great excuse for her and her mom to check out the campus, and since Silvina was already visiting Julie at her home in Eureka, she just tagged along for the trip. After an hour-and-a-half long drive, the trio arrived in Stockton, California, and they checked into a hotel, and then the next day, which was the 13th, Julie competed in this cheerleading competition, and then afterwards, her mom, and Silvina spent the rest of the day checking out the campus and the surrounding town. Early the next morning, which was the 14th, the women checked out of their hotel and then drove 3 hours southeast to the sprawling motel complex called Cedar Lodge that was located just outside of Yosemite National Park's western entrance. Their plan was to spend a couple of days sightseeing inside of Yosemite before heading back to the San Francisco airport, where they were going to meet Carol's husband and Julie's father, Jens, and then the four of them would continue their journey and fly to Arizona, where they would explore the Grand Canyon before finally heading back home to Eureka, California. So midday on the 14th, these 3 women arrive at the Cedar Lodge, and the lot would have been nearly empty because it was the winter time and not that many people were visiting the park at that time. So they pull into the lot, they park their car, they go into the front desk where they checked in and they got their keys, and then they left the office and walked along the row of first floor rooms all the way to the very corner of the building to room 509, which was their room. Carol used her key, she opened the door, they went inside and dropped their luggage, and then they decided that they were just too tired to actually go in the park and go sightseeing that day. So instead, they kind of had a low-key afternoon and evening, mostly in their hotel room. The next morning, which was the 15th, the women got up early, they hopped in their red rental car, and they drove to the western entrance of Yosemite. And they went inside, they parked their car, and they have this wonderful day looking at these astonishing cliff sides and snow-covered mountains, and these huge sequoia trees, and these beautiful meadows that stretched out in front of them. And then towards the end of the day, Julie and Sylvina actually went ice skating on a frozen pond. So it was just this totally magical day at the park. And then finally, as the sun was starting to go down, the trio finally left the park, got in their rental car, and drove back to the Cedar Lodge. There, they ate dinner at the lodge's 1950s style diner. They ate hamburgers, and then afterwards, they swung by the front desk and rented some VHS movie tapes that they brought back to their room. Once they were inside room 509, the women changed into their pajamas and then sat on the bed and watched one of their movies. And then when it was over, they brushed their teeth and then they got in bed, turned out the light, and tried to go to sleep. But a few minutes after their lights were out, they heard a knock on their door. The following day, which was the 16th, Jens, Carol's husband and Julie's father, was anxiously waiting at the San Francisco airport for his wife and his daughter's friend. And he's looking at his watch and he knows they don't have that much time before their flight is going to take off. And he's just hoping they're going to come running around a corner and they're going to barely make this flight. But they don't. And finally, Jens, who does not have a cell phone, and neither does Carol, he decides there must have been some sort of miscommunication and that Carol and the girls must have flown on ahead. And so he decides at the last minute to just board the flight himself and fly to Arizona in hopes his family will be there. But when he touches down in Arizona, his family is not there. And so he rushed to the hotel hoping that maybe they were there. They weren't. He spoke to the hotel's front desk and said, hey, has my wife Carol contacted you? And they said, no, she hasn't contacted us and we have no record of her being here. And so Jens is obviously very upset. He's very worried, and he spends the rest of the day calling around to friends and family and acquaintances and anybody who might know where Carol and the girls are. But nobody has heard from them and nobody knows where they are. And so that night, as Jens is about to go to bed, he convinces himself that they are probably just fine. This is just some screw up. Carol is an unbelievably fierce woman. She's incredibly competent. She will take care of those girls, and I'm sure I will see them tomorrow morning. But when he woke up the next morning and Carol had not made any contact with the hotel or reached out to him in any way, and there was just no sign of her or the girls, Jens finally contacted police. That day, after the police spoke with Jens, the first call they made was to the Cedar Lodge, which is the last place they knew Carol, Julie, and Sylvina had been. The manager of the lodge would tell police that he had not seen Carol or the girls on the day they were supposed to check out, which was the 16th. But Carol had checked out in advance, so the manager would not have seen her anyways. She would not have had to go by the front desk on the way out. So that was not an anomaly. The manager also told police that on the 16th, after the 3 women should have been out of their room, the cleaners went by room 509, and when they went inside, it was vacant and nothing seemed amiss. It was relatively clean, minus some wet towels that had been left on the floor of the bathroom. The keys to the room were left on the desk as they should be. It just looked like the women had left. And so the police reached out to the car rental company at the San Francisco airport to see if Carol had made it to the airport and dropped off her car. But when they spoke to the manager of this rental company, they would say, no, Carol has not dropped off her car, and she hasn't called about extending her lease, which is now overdue. Based on the information the police gathered from the lodge and from the rental car company, they began operating on the theory that the 3 women left their lodge motel room on the 16th and then either got into a car accident somewhere and had just not been found yet, or they had driven somewhere, gotten out of their car and gotten lost, perhaps inside of Yosemite National Park or some other trail somewhere, or they had fallen victim to some crime. But at this point, the police were not taking seriously the idea that foul play was involved. A massive search was launched in and around the Cedar Lodge complex, as well as around the western entrance of Yosemite, but absolutely nothing was found. A number of workers from Cedar Lodge were interviewed by police and subsequently cleared of any wrongdoing. Also, a number of friends and family of the 3 women were also interviewed by police and cleared as well. Then, a few days after this search has started, there was a break in the case. Carol's wallet, with her ID and credit cards inside of it, was found lying on the ground in Modesto, California, which was a suburb that was located about 2 hours west of Cedar Lodge.
It's gonna get horrible, ain't it? Oh, Lord.
Some high school students saw it on the ground and gave it to a police officer. There was no reason for Carol and the girls to be in Modesto, California, and so this signaled to police that a third party had to have been involved in their disappearance. And so if that was the case, then almost certainly these three women had fallen victim to some sort of crime. Over the next several weeks, police continued to search the roads and trails in and around Cedar Lodge and the western entrance to Yosemite, and they looked all over Modesto. But besides this wallet being found, there were no further developments with the case. Then on March 18th, which is about a month after the three women originally went missing, a hiker was way off in the middle of this forest about 2 hours north of Cedar Lodge and about an hour and a half northeast of Modesto, California, when he turned onto this logging road that nobody really ever went down. And as he's walking down this road, he sees up ahead the skeleton of a car. It looks like a car had been set on fire. And so he calls it into police, not really knowing what he's looking at. The police come out and they're able to identify this car. This shell of a car is the red rental car that Carol and the girls had been using. When they searched the car, the inside, the main cabin of the car, there really was nothing left. There looked to be some remnants of some suitcases and maybe...
So somebody did something to them and set the car on fire, hoping it wouldn't be identified, more than likely. Oh God.
Some clothing, but mostly it was just the frame of the car and some springs. But when they opened the trunk of the car, they made a grisly discovery. Inside were two very badly burned bodies with their hands still bound behind their backs. Using dental records, they were able to confirm the bodies belonged to Carol and Sylvina. But there was no sign of Carol's daughter, Julie, the 15-year-old. She was not in the car, around the car, or in the surrounding areas. And so there was this glimmer of hope that maybe if law enforcement acts fast enough, they can find Julie and save her before it's too late. But all hope was lost when just a couple of days into this search around the car, when they still hadn't found anything, the police received an anonymous handwritten letter. And on this letter was this crude map that showed this very specific spot overlooking a lake. It was Don Pedro Lake, which was located about an hour to the south of where the car was. And then on this note as well was a phrase. It just said, "We had fun with this one." Using this crude map, the police went to Don Pedro Lake. They went up to the overlook as marked on this map, and there they looked down and they saw the crumpled and badly decomposed remains of Julie. At this point, police already had several suspects they had picked up in Modesto, California, that they believed were connected in some way to what happened to these three women. Of these suspects, two were of particular interest to the police. They were half-brothers Eugene Dykes and Michael Lorwick. They had been arrested shortly after Carol's wallet had been found for shooting at a Modesto police officer and for several drug charges and for violating their parole. Once these half-brothers were in custody, Eugene made several self-incriminating remarks, basically insinuating that he and Michael had been involved in what happened to these three women. And then after Carol, Sylvina, and Julie's bodies had been found, the synthetic fibers that were found all over Carol matched the synthetic fibers that were pulled off of Michael and Eugene on their clothing and from their vehicle when they were arrested. And so the police were very confident that they had their killers and they had them behind bars already. But they still needed to compile evidence before they could formally charge them and make their names public to the media. And so when the news broke about the women's bodies being found and the public began panicking about a killer or killers on the loose, the police came out and said, "Everybody calm down. We have the people responsible. We just can't tell you who they are yet. You need to be patient. We're building the case, but everybody's safe. There's nothing to worry about." But 4 months went by and the police still had not come out and publicly charged anyone with these murders. But they continued to assure the public that they had their killers behind bars, and so nobody has anything to worry about. On the afternoon of July 22nd, roughly 4 months after the discovery of the three bodies, Dr. Desmond Kidd, who was was the medical director for Yosemite, had just finished a long 24-hour shift in the clinic, and he had just gotten back to his cabin, which was inside of Yosemite, when his pager went off. And so he went to a phone, he dialed the number that was on his pager, and the park dispatcher picked up and said, "Hey, Dr. Kidd, can you be a part of a search for a missing person?" And Dr. Kidd said, "Sure, I'd love to help." And then there was a pause, and the park dispatcher said, "Hey, just so you know, there are law enforcement implications with this one." And then before he could clarify, he hung up the phone. And so Dr. Kidd is really confused what he meant about these implications, because in the past 3 years he had worked at this park, he had unfortunately been involved in many searches for missing people in the park, but they were never tied to any sort of criminal activity. They were always because the person got lost or fell or something, which was fairly common inside of the park. And so as soon as this convoy of other Yosemite staff members that are part of the search rolled up in front of his cabin, Dr. Kidd ran outside, he hopped in one of the vehicles, and he asked the driver, "What's going on? What are these law enforcement implications with regards to this missing person?" And the driver would explain to him that, hey, 4 months earlier, we had those 3 Yosemite tourists go missing, Carol, Julie, and Sylvina, and they were found murdered outside of Yosemite. And while the police have said they have their killers behind bars, the police still have not come out and actually named who their killers are or charged anyone in their murders. And so that's made many of us think that maybe they don't have the killer or killers behind bars. Maybe there's a killer or killers still on the loose. And unfortunately, tonight we have another person who's gone missing inside of the park. And she's gone missing under very mysterious circumstances, which has led many of us to think that it's possible, if there really is a killer out there, they've struck again tonight. Dr. Kidd was totally shocked at this news, but he was even more shocked when he discovered who it was that was missing. It was somebody he knew. Her name was Joey Armstrong, and she was a 26-year-old naturalist employed by Yosemite. A naturalist is like an expert tour guide that knows everything about the park. Dr. Kidd and the rest of the convoy of Yosemite staff that were going to be a part of the search sped around the corner and went down this unmarked road with huge trees on either side, and then eventually they came out of this heavily forested road and they entered into this unbelievably beautiful meadow. And on the very far end across this huge meadow is this one green cabin sitting at the base of this mountain with a forest on the other side of it. This totally secluded cabin in the middle of Yosemite was where Joey was living. As Dr. Kidd and the convoy went across this meadow and got closer to this cabin, Dr. Kidd could see park rangers walking around the perimeter of the cabin, marking it off with yellow police tape. When Dr. Kidd and his vehicle came to a stop right outside of the marked off area, they got out and they could see parked right next to the cabin was this white pickup truck. It was Joey's pickup truck, and inside of it was a bunch of luggage, and it looked like there was luggage that had spilled out onto the ground and some of the doors were still open. And so it gave Dr. Kidd and the rest of the searchers the impression that Joey must have either been loading things into her truck or unloading things out of her truck at the time she went missing. Dr. Kidd and the rest of the searchers kind of huddled up with the park rangers, and the rangers explained that Joey's friends that were living in San Francisco were expecting Joey to arrive at their house the day before, but when she did,
just like the other ones, supposed to be leaving, get on a flight, never show up. Oh, this ain't gonna be good. I don't think they have the right person.
Didn't, and they couldn't get in touch with her, they had called it in, and that's why they were there looking for her. And so after talking about the circumstances of the case, they all decided they would break into 5 different search groups, and they would begin searching the immediate area. Dr. Kidd and 4 other searchers began walking behind the cabin towards the tree line, and then once they got into that forest, they started walking towards this creek. And as they walked up along this creek, they suddenly noticed a whole bunch of trampled ferns and saplings, and it looked like someone had come running through there, and perhaps the person who was running was Joey. And so they begin following these tracks that go right alongside this creek, and then at some point, one of the searchers yells out, "Hey, what's that up there?" And about 10 feet ahead of them, where the ground kind of sloped down into a ditch out of view, right before the ditch, hanging on a little tree on the ground, was a set of car keys glinting in the sunlight. And so Dr. Kidd, who was at the front of his small search party, he began walking towards these keys, and as he got closer and closer, he began to be able to see down into this ditch right on the other side of these keys. And as soon as he could actually see what was at the bottom, he immediately began to gag, and he turned around and quickly walked away. The other 4 searchers, they walked up and they had a look down, and they too had a similar reaction. And before long, the group was running back to the cabin to tell the park rangers what they had just discovered. When the rangers heard about what was in the forest, they immediately contacted the police, and the police sent a police officer to Joey Armstrong's mother's house, which was just outside of San Francisco. When the mother opened the door, the officer told her that they had just gotten a call from Yosemite and they need her to call them. And then he handed her a piece of paper with a phone number on it. Joey's mother was immediately concerned and confused and tried to get more information from this officer, but the officer just said, look, you're just gonna have to call that phone number. I really don't know anything. And so eventually she thanked him, she shut the door, and she went into the kitchen and she dials this number. After someone picked up, she introduced herself as Joey's mother, and at that point, the person who picked up quickly handed the phone off to someone who sounded much more senior, and this person asked Joey's mother, are you aware that your daughter is missing? So Joey's mother says, no, I was not aware of that. And then this person very delicately says, ma'am, we believe we found your daughter's body near her cabin. Joey's mother's reaction was instant. She said, well, did you check her hair? She has red hair. Can you confirm it's really her because she's got bright red hair? Can you make sure it's really her? And the person on the other side of the line hesitated for a minute and then just said, ma'am, we're not sure if she has red hair or not. We'll get back to you. And so after this call finally ended, Joey's mother was confused. How could they not know what color her daughter's hair was? That seems like such an easy way to potentially identify whether or not this was really her daughter. Why would they make her wait for something like that? And so she was horribly distraught. She didn't know what else to do. She was told to just kind of wait for more news, but she couldn't do that. And so she began planning a trip out to Yosemite to actually get out there and see what was going on. But the earliest flight she could possibly get was not until very early the next morning. And so she has this very restless night's sleep where she's just praying that this person was not actually her daughter. And then the next morning she gets up, she rushes to the airport, and as she's waiting to board her plane, she grabs a newspaper from a nearby kiosk, and the headline reads, "Naturalist Beheaded at Yosemite." And that's when she understood why that person could not tell her whether or not this was.
Oh my God. I told you people he does not fail. Wow. That poor young girl. This poor lady. Oh, the mom. Oh my God.
Was her daughter based on hair color. It's because this body did not have a head. But from the time she got that phone call to this headline running in the paper, these searchers had found the head. It was located 27 feet away under some brush, and they were able to confirm that it was the body of Joey Armstrong. Joey's death was immediately treated like a homicide, and right away the public began to openly suggest that maybe Joey's murder is connected to the murders of Carol, Julie, and Sylvina from 4 months earlier, even though the police were still saying we have our killers behind bars for those murders. Joey's murder is completely unconnected. Luckily, the public and the police did not have to argue for very long about who was right about this, because there was a break in Joey's case almost immediately. On the night that Joey went missing, another Yosemite staff member had happened to drive by her cabin, and they noticed a distinctive SUV parked outside of her cabin that they didn't recognize. It was a blue 1979 International Scout, and as it happened, there were only 2 of these particular types of vehicles registered in Yosemite Valley. And so within 24 hours, the police had tracked down one of these 2 vehicles. It was located about 12 miles away from the western entrance of Yosemite and was pulled off the side of this highway. The police pulled up alongside it and parked. They walked up. There was no one inside of this vehicle, but then down this embankment off the highway led down to this forest where there was a river kind of out of sight that people like to swim and fish in. And so these 2 officers decide to head down and see if maybe the driver is down there. So they make their way down, and sure enough, they come in contact with the driver. He was laying on this rock, completely nude, smoking marijuana. And so the 2 officers, they come up to him and announce themselves. And this very well-built, good-looking guy stands up and he calmly covers himself and he takes the marijuana out of his mouth and he says, "Hey, what can I do for you guys?" And so over the course of their conversation, the police would learn this guy's name was Kerry Stainer. He was 38 years old, and he was the handyman at Cedar Lodge Motel. He would tell police that he was not anywhere near Joey's cabin on the night she went missing, and the police ultimately bought it and said, okay, they confiscated his marijuana, and then they walked back up the hill, leaving him down there, and they took some pictures of his car and the tires on his car, and then they left. A couple of days later, some FBI investigators that had been called in for this case, they analyzed those pictures those officers had taken of the tires of Carrie's car, and they compared them to pictures of the tire tracks at Joey's cabin, and they determined they were a perfect match. So later that day, which was July 24th, police officers went back out and tracked Carey down again. This time he was having lunch at one of his favorite spots. It was a nudist resort about 3 hours northwest of the Cedar Lodge. There he was arrested on the suspicion of murdering Joey Armstrong, and he was brought in for questioning. As soon as he was walked into the police station and was booked, Carey dropped a bombshell. He confessed to not only murdering Joey Armstrong, but also he confessed to murdering Carol Sund, along with her daughter, Julie Sund, and Silvina Peloso, the friend of Julie Sund. And he did all of this on his own. He had no other accomplices, which means the police never had the killer or killers behind bars. It would turn out Eugene Dykes, who was one of their primary suspects, was lying when he made those self-incriminating remarks about he and his half-brother Michael. And as for those synthetic fibers that were found on Eugene and Michael, those fibers belonged to a very commonly sold blanket, and so they did not definitively tie Michael and Eugene to the crime. So for half a year in 1999, there really was a serial killer just roaming free in Yosemite National Park, just like many people who lived in that area and like some people in the media had speculated. Carey would go on to give a very detailed and graphic 6-hour-long confession of how he went about killing all 4 women. This is his awful story. On February 14th, 1999, so the day that Carol, Julie, and Silvina arrived at Cedar Lodge, Carey was on his way to his girlfriend's house. His girlfriend, like Carey, worked at the Cedar Lodge. She was a waitress at their 1950s-style diner. That night, as Carey walked up her front walkway towards her front door, he made up his mind that he was going to act on a fantasy he had had since he was 7 years old. And that fantasy was to kill a young woman. And so his plan that night was he would go inside and he would not only kill his girlfriend, but he would also kill her 2 daughters, who were 10 and 11 years old at the time. But when he went inside the house and was about to carry out this plan,
Did he say he had had this fantasy to kill someone since he was 7 years old? 7? Oh.
he noticed out one of their windows there was a man in their backyard, and he asked his girlfriend, "Who's that guy out there?" And she would say, "Oh, I hired someone to take care of our property, so he's going to be cutting the grass and doing some things with our garden. He's going to be here for a little bit, but he'll stay outside." And so this totally screwed up Carey's plan, because he was not expecting there to be anybody there that night. And so for several hours, Carey anxiously sat there, constantly looking out the window, waiting for this guy to leave so he could kill these 3 people. But the worker was just taking a lot of time, and it didn't seem like he was even close to being done. And so finally, Carey left without any explanation. Angry and frustrated, he began driving back to Cedar Lodge, where he had an apartment on the 2nd floor. And when he pulled into the parking lot, he noticed there was a car he had not seen earlier in the day. It was a 1999 red Pontiac Grand Prix. And suddenly, Carey had this urge to find out who owned that car. And maybe, if he was lucky, it was a woman who owned that car, and she was potentially alone. And if that was the case, he could fulfill his fantasy on this woman and not worry about the fact that he couldn't kill his girlfriend and her 2 kids. And so Carey parked his car a little bit a ways from this red car, and he walked over to the room that was right in front of this red car. And it was room 509, and he peeked behind one of the curtains into the room, which was all lit up, and he couldn't believe his luck. There were 3 women inside of this room. It was Carol, Julie, and Silvina. And so Carey stayed back and continued looking through the window just to make sure there wasn't a man inside of this room. And after a while of watching them go in and out of the bathroom and nobody coming into the room but these 3 women and no men coming into the room from the outside, he was certain they were alone. And so when Carey finally turned around and left to go back to his room, he made the decision that he was going to come back the next day and kill them. The next day, which was February 15th, Carey secretly followed the 3 women when they hopped in their rental and drove to Yosemite. He followed them to the parking lot, and then he waited in the parking lot until the women had finished going through the park and having this wonderful time. He trailed them from the parking lot back to the Cedar Lodge, and then he secretly followed them when they went to that diner and they had hamburgers for dinner. And he continued to follow them from a distance and watch them rent movies from the front desk. And he followed them all the way back to their room. And once he knew they were inside the room and he watched them long enough to confirm they were not going to leave again, he went back to his room and he got his toolbox. In his toolbox was rope, duct tape, a knife, and a gun. And then around 11 p.m., he left his apartment and went downstairs and walked all the way back over to that corner room, room 509, where the women were. And he looked in the window and it was totally dark inside, so he assumed they must be sleeping, and he knocked on the door. A few minutes later, Carol came to the door and very cautiously opened it up just a crack, leaving that chain link lock still attached. And so she looked through at Carrie and said, "Hi, can I help you?" And Carrie, who held up his handyman toolbox and pointed to his name tag that said he was the Cedar Lodge handyman, he said, "Hi, ma'am, sorry to disturb you so late, but there is a leak in the room right above yours, and I need to make sure the leak is not coming down into your room. So can I come in and just have a quick look, and then I'll be out of here?" And Carol apparently was just not buying it, and she said, "Look, I haven't seen any leaks in this room. I don't think there is one, but even if there is, can it please wait until tomorrow, because we're all trying to sleep." But Carrie was very persistent, and Carrie was known to be very charming and very disarming, and eventually he talked his way into the room. And so he walks inside, he walks past the bed where the other two teen girls are still sleeping, he goes into the bathroom, and for a few minutes he kind of pretends to fiddle around inside of the bathroom while Carol is standing right outside looking in at him. And then at some point, Carrie reached into his toolbox, pulled out the gun, and he aimed it at Carol, and he said, "Stay calm, I'm not going to hurt you, this is just a robbery." Carol most likely believed their best chance at getting out of this situation was just to comply and do what he says. He'll rob us and then he'll leave and we'll be okay. And so Carol very dutifully went back into the room and she quietly woke up her daughter and her daughter's friend, and before long Carrie had tied up all three of them. He put the two teenagers in the bathroom and shut the door, and then he put Carol on the bed, and then he proceeded to assault Carol before strangling her to death with more rope. And then after she was dead, he carried her body outside of the motel room and put her in the trunk of her own rental car. And then after he shut the trunk, he went back inside the motel room, he went to the bathroom, he opened it up, he grabbed Sylvina, who was crying, and pulled her out, and he left Julie alone, cowering inside the bathroom by herself. He shut the door behind her, and then he brought Sylvina over to the bed, where he assaulted her before strangling her as well to death with some additional rope. And then after Sylvina was dead, he carried her body outside of the motel and put her in the trunk of the rental car along with Carol's body. And then after that, he went back inside the motel room, and then once again, he opened up the bathroom door, he grabbed Julie, pulled her out, and proceeded to assault her as well. But then afterwards, he did not strangle her to death. Instead, he walked her back into the bathroom and shut and locked the door. And while she was in there wondering what's going to happen to her, what happened to her mom, what happened to her friend, he proceeded to clean up the room and tidy it up, and he moved all of their luggage out of their room and put it into the rental car. And then after he was satisfied, he went back inside the motel room, he opened up the bathroom door, he pulled Julie out and had her stand right outside the bathroom, and then Carrie proceeded to clean up the bathroom but left a couple of wet towels on the ground to give the impression that the women had left in a bit of a hurry. And so after that, he grabbed Julie and he walked her out to the car.
He's been going over this in his head since he was 7, had to, because he is just, oh my God. Just think, if she would have just shut the door and said no, or shut the door and went and called the front desk to confirm, that is probably what happened. None of it. We haven't even got to Joey is the other girl. We haven't even got to her yet. She's missing a freaking head.
And he sat her down in the front seat. She only had a blanket on at this point. Everything else had been taken off of her. And then Carrie hopped in the front seat and he began driving off. Julie must have been beyond terrified. She has no idea where her mom is. She has no idea where her friend is. She has no idea they're actually dead, locked in the trunk right behind her. And the man that had just assaulted her for hours is now driving her into the darkness. She has no idea where she's going, and all she's got is this blanket around her. It's just beyond brutal what's happening to this poor girl. And so for 2 hours, Carrie drove them west along the highway in the middle of the night, and the whole time he's trying to make small talk with this poor girl, trying trying to tell her that she's going to be okay and that her mom and her friend, they're going to be okay. And then finally, he pulls off the highway down some switchbacks into this big parking lot of the Don Pedro Lake. And then once he parks the car, there's no other cars around. It's still dark out. The sun hasn't come up. He gets out and he tells Julie to get out of the car. But Julie is so scared, she can't move. So she can't even get out of the car. And so Carrie gets out. He walks around to her side. He opens the door and he scoops her up like you might hold a baby. And he walked with her up the trail all the way to this overlook that was well away from any prying eyes in the parking lot. And once he was out of sight, he took her blanket off and he laid it down, and then he proceeded to assault her again. And then as the sun began to come up over the lake, Carrie realized that he had to end his fantasy and begin to cover his tracks. And so Carrie stops what he's doing. He stands up, he reaches down and pulls Julie up to her feet. And so she's standing with her back to the lake. And as he's looking at her, he says, "I love you." And then he pulls out his knife and begins hacking her throat. And then he pushes her down the hillside where she tumbles and finally comes to a stop underneath some bushes where she dies. Carrie grabbed the blanket on the ground and he walked back to the rental car in the lot. There was nobody out there, so he hopped inside. He drove out of the lot and drove 1 hour north until he was well into this forest, and he pulled down a logging road where he abandoned this car. After he ditched it, he walked back up to the highway and caught a cab back to Cedar Lodge. He would come back to the car and torch it 2 days later. He would also make a special trip to Modesto, California, where he would drop Carol's wallet in the middle of the road near a high school in order to confuse investigators. A month later, when Carol and Sylvina's body were found in the back of the burned out car, Carrie would send that handwritten note to police that had the map of where Julie's body was and that horrible message of "we had fun with this one," referencing Julie. He sent that to police in order to further confuse them. He wanted them to believe that there really was more than one person perpetrating these murders, hence the "we had fun with this one." Months would go by, and the police, despite questioning Carrie along with the other Cedar Lodge staff members, never considered him a suspect. And that was because, one, they really thought he was just a nice, normal guy and couldn't be capable of committing violence against these 3 women. And two, probably most importantly, the police discovered when Carrie was a child, his younger brother was kidnapped by a pedophile and held for 7 years. And although his brother was ultimately returned to the family alive, that experience was incredibly traumatic and devastating to Carrie. And so the police figured there's no way this guy would ever abduct or harm other people because he knows how traumatic and awful that is for the victim and the victim's family. If anything, Carrie seemed like the type of guy who would go out of his way to protect and save these 3 women from being abducted or from being harmed. In July of that year, so 4 months after the 3 women's bodies were discovered, Carrie, who believed he had completely gotten away with murder, and to that point he really had, he was just driving around Yosemite kind of reveling in the fact that he had gotten to live out this fantasy and not get punished for it, when he noticed there was this woman way off in the distance walking in and out of this cabin that was fairly isolated. And so he drove his 1979 International Scout blue SUV down this forested road, and he reaches this meadow, and he looks across this meadow, and now that this woman is even closer, he can tell she's clearly loading things into her truck. And she's going back and forth, and he's watching, wondering if there's anybody else helping her, because this cabin is very secluded, and he's thinking, if she's alone, I might be able to kill her too. And so after a while, when he only sees her loading things into her white pickup truck, he decides he's gonna go kill her. And so he drives across the meadow and he pulls up right next to her truck, and he gets out and he introduces himself. And the woman is so completely caught off guard by this random strange man showing up in the middle of the night, suddenly acting so friendly, that kind of reflexively, in an effort not to be rude, she says, "Hi, I'm Joey Armstrong. Nice to meet you. What are you doing down here?" And Carrie would proceed to spark up some small talk. He asked her if she believed in Bigfoot, and they kind of got on this tangent about Bigfoot. And then at some point, Carrie drew a pistol and he aimed it at her and said, "Go inside your cabin." And so Joey put her hands up and she went inside the cabin like she was told, and Carrie followed her inside, and then he bound her wrists and he bound her mouth with duct tape, and then he ordered her to get back inside of his SUV. And then once she was sitting inside the front passenger seat, Carrie got in the driver's seat and he began leaving the cabin, headed back out away towards that road he came in on. And as he's bombing across the meadow, Joey leaps head first out of the window of this moving car and smashes onto the ground, and she immediately jumps up and just starts running back towards the cabin. Carrie jams on the brakes, he hops out and he starts chasing after Joey, but Joey manages to get fairly close to that tree line right behind the cabin before Carrie ultimately grabs her and tackles her to the ground. And then Joey is viciously trying to fight Carrie off of her, and Carrie, kind of in a panic, draws his knife and he tries to slash at Joey, but Joey tucks her chin, protecting her neck from being stabbed. And so frustrated, Carrie just stands up and he grabs Joey by the hair and he begins hauling her towards the forest behind her cabin. And the whole time Joey's doing everything in her power to try to escape, but she just can't. And finally they get inside the woods and Carrie drags her into this ditch. And once she's down at the bottom, he puts his foot on the top of her head and forces it back, forcibly exposing her throat. And then at that point, he pulls out his knife and he begins to cut. Afterwards, Carrie considered keeping Joey's head, but ultimately he would try to hide it in some bushes nearby. After Carrie attempted to cover up some of the blood in the area with some branches and leaves, he left the forest and went back to his SUV. He didn't even attempt to tidy up the scene. He left her truck at...
This is a little much, bro. Wow.
as is. He left her cabin as is. He just hopped in his SUV and drove back to Cedar Lodge. Carrie would tell police that as soon as he killed Joey Armstrong, all he wanted to do was go kill his girlfriend and her two young daughters, the 10 and 11-year-old. But police caught him before he could carry out the attack. Cary Stayner, who never showed any remorse for his victims, was ultimately sentenced to death and is currently awaiting execution in San Quentin Prison in Northern California. One of the more distressing aspects of this case was Carol's camera that was found intact near the burned out car in the woods. The police would develop the pictures on this camera in hopes there would be some clue as to who murdered them. But it would turn out there wasn't any usable evidence on the camera. It was just pictures of Carol, her daughter, and Sylvina having this wonderful time in Yosemite, and that was it. But after Cary confessed to what he did to these poor women, those pictures take on a whole new, much darker meaning. In the final 8 images of the camera roll, we know Cary Stayner was either literally watching these women secretly at the time the picture was taken, or he was patiently waiting nearby for them to return. The final image that was taken on this camera was taken by Julie of her mother sitting on the bed and her friend Sylvina sitting on the other bed as they're getting ready to turn out the lights and go to sleep. That picture was taken just moments before Cary knocked on their door. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, for the like buttons next...
I don't even know. Like, how can someone want to do what this man did from the time he was, he said 7. This was his fantasy from the time he was 7, was to evidently assault, which we all know what he's talking about, and murder a young women. See, death is too good for him. I wish there was a way. I know it'll be invented one day, probably like long after I'm gone, but I wish there was a way to make the criminal feel what he did to his victims every day for the rest of his life until he died. Like, feel the same pain, fear, everything they did, they actually feel. Because death, it's too easy. Prison's too easy. They need something more. Sorry, they do. This is my opinion. Like it or love it or hate it or whatever, I don't care, but that's how I feel about it. All right, we're ending it. We're going it. Like I said, MrBallen, he never fails. He really brings, yeah. All right, so if you're a fan of the spooky, scary, strange, or deranged, think about subscribing. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up. It really tends to help these days. And, as always, be good to one another. I'll see you in the next one. Stay spooky.